Hi folks, I'm Shamus from Outdoors Inspiration. This is my German Shepherd, Petra. Welcome to Outdoors Inspiration Outdoor Essentials. Good girl. Now today I'd like to have a chat about the layering system. It's now early November and we're into those shoulder months leading up into winter, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to protect ourselves from the elements. And by elements, of course, I mean wind, precipitation and temperature. Before we do that, I'm just going to move on a moment and I'm going to make a brew, a cup of coffee. Now there's a reason for that, because it helps explain the layering process, believe it or not. Come on Petra, onwards and upwards. Good girl. Radiation, conduction, evaporation, and through the cool breeze that's blowing across the pot, convection is now starting to cool it down. And these are the types of heat transfer that our bodies and our clothing systems have to deal with. Bang! Good girl. When we exert ourselves, our body's way of regulating our temperature is to sweat, generally speaking, unless of course you're Prince Andrew. And as we sweat and that moisture gathers on the main parts of our body, if it's exposed to the air through evaporation as it leaves our body, it cools us down. And that's fine on a lovely summer's day, on the beach perhaps. But out here today, cooling down is the last thing I'm going to need. And I need to move that moisture away from my body. So now enter the base layer. Now, they come in many shapes and sizes, as do people, and tight-fitting clothing isn't the most flattering thing on me. For a synthetic fibre base layer to be effective, it does need to be close-fitting. That's so it can take the moisture and transport it away from your body. Not all base layers, of course, are synthetic. Some are made from natural fibres, like merino wool. And merino wool can be very, very effective as a base layer. It's nice and warm and cosy. It's pretty stink proof as well. It deals with the bacteria that we exert very, very well, so it can be used for multiple days. But it will retain moisture. It won't deal with it as effectively as a synthetic fibre base layer. There is a mixture, however. You can get merino mixed with synthetic fibres, and that's a very good compromise between the two. Arc'teryx produce some beautiful garments that are merino and synthetic fibre mix. I've got a beautiful base layer that I went to pull out of the drawer this morning, only to my horror to find I've got a hole in it. It's several years old and I'm going to have to replace it, but Arc'teryx is not the cheapest brand in the world. Base layers will also come in various designs. I'm wishing today that I hadn't worn a t-shirt. It's quite chilly actually, despite the sunshine. I wish I'd worn a long sleeve tee to insulate my arms a little bit better. My preference is either a base layer t-shirt or a long sleeve tee with a neck zipper. And with the neck zipper, of course, you can vent a little bit and regulate your temperature a little bit better. Cotton t-shirts are dreadful base layers, to be perfectly honest. They will hold the moisture next to your body. They'll get cold very quickly when they're wet, and they won't transfer that moisture away and they won't dry out. Best avoided, really. So that's how evaporation fits into the picture, but right now I am getting quite chilly. And that's because I'm radiating heat, and the convection caused by the cold northeasterly wind is taking the heat straight off of my body and carrying it away much, much faster than it normally would radiate from me. So I'm going to find myself some insulation and I'm going to put on what we call the mid layer. Now this particular mid layer that I'm going to wear is made by Rab. I'm not particularly an advocate of any particular brand, just the brands that work for me. It doesn't matter whether it's Peter Storm, Rab, Arc'teryx or whoever. At the end of the day, they all do a pretty similar job, don't they? It's just down to fashion, I suppose. Well, that and something else. Marketing. They all want a little bit of that from us, don't they? And I don't suppose the younger generation understand what that means. We pay for everything by card these days, don't we? Folding money, that's what they're after. They want all of it, or some of it, or most of it, or the biggest share that they could possibly get from us. I can palpably feel the arms folding. Well, I don't buy that because of marketing, Shamus. I'm not a dope. I buy it because it's the research and development that these companies put into the equipment that they produce. And yes, they do. And yes, they are pushing boundaries. But at the end of the day, let's remember in 1911, December, a man called Roald Amundsen was the first man to reach the South Pole. He did that long before Gore-Tex, Primaloft or any other proprietary brands of that type were even thought about. I think he discovered the Northwest Passage as well. I don't think he had a Musto jacket to wear while he was doing that. Anyway, I'm digressing. At the end of the day, the purpose of the mid-layer is an insulating layer, and they will come in various weights and sizes and designs. And that's going to have to vary with the season and the prevailing conditions. But its primary job is to stop me from radiating heat. The main places I'm going to radiate heat from primarily is my torso. So I'm wearing an insulating layer now, and I'm starting to warm up. This insulating layer also has a tightly woven fabric over the top of it. It's brushed underneath to make me feel nice and warm and cozy. The other places where I'll start to lose temperature fairly quickly are my head and my extremities. As you can see, I don't have a great deal of insulation on the top of my head, so I generally, and when you watch my videos, I generally wear a hat. The reason why I wear these Montaigne hats is because I find them very comfortable. No other reason. And for my extremities, of course, I put on a pair of gloves. Now my hands get cold fairly quickly now. I don't know if it's an age thing. It started happening a few years ago when I was out running in the winter, and I found that I was actually losing motor function to a certain extent. I couldn't operate my fingers particularly well, so I always wear running gloves. And density of gloves is going to vary. I'm not going to preach about gloves. I mean, wear what's comfy and what you think is right, but you know, find something that's giving you enough insulation and will also protect you from the wind and the rain if necessary. But what I do find is that once my hands start to warm up, it's the first thing that I find is uncomfortable. It's the first thing that if I need to start shedding any heat, I have to take off. I find it quite uncomfortable to be wearing gloves if my hands start warming up. And once that's done, my primary means of regulating temperature is really my hat. I discovered this a long time ago, 30 odd years ago. As a young man out walking, I could continue wearing the same layers, take my hat off when I'm walking up a hill and put it back on again when I'm getting cold. But these factors don't just apply to our torso, do they? Of course it applies to our legs as well. So very briefly, the trousers that I prefer to wear are Montaigne Terra pants. They've got like a mini ripstop material over the stress points or the rubbing points on the trouser, and the rest of the trouser is very lightweight and allows for rapid drying once it's damp. So that's the base layer and the mid layer covered. Now, as I said before, the design, shape and size and everything else is down to you. That's down to your budget, down to how fashionable you want to be, etc, etc. But at the end of the day, those are the basic principles of the base layer and the mid layer. Now, to make our system complete, we're going to need some sort of outer shell. The purpose of the outer shell is to stop convection and, to a certain extent, conductivity. And by conductivity, I mean cold rain or snow getting onto our bodies. Of course, if all you're worried about is a cold wind on a cold day, having some sort of wind blocking capability in your mid layer may be all that you require. Or maybe a jacket that has a wind blocking capability of some sort, whether that's because it's a wind shirt or it's a fleece that has a tightly woven fabric on the outside. It doesn't really matter, does it? As long as it does what you need it to do. So now I've got the base layer, which is wicking moisture from my exertion away from my body. I've got a mid layer providing insulation, and I've got an outer shell protecting me from the elements. Of course, outer shells, like all products, vary greatly from manufacturer to manufacturer and textile to textile. That's a whole nother video, and I will cover that for you. Now, for the average hike or day walk on Dartmoor, where I live, That's pretty much it, isn't it? I've got a wicking layer, I've got an insulation layer, and I've got an outer shell. It's very easy to let slip the fact that part of our layering system should also cover our legs as well. Well, I've spoken about trousers. What about waterproof trousers? They're just as important. A very experienced source once said to me, Shamus, don't worry too much about waterproof trousers. They're going to spend most of their life living in the bottom of your rucksack. Get something that's lightweight and compact and that you can forget about until you need them. And I've stuck by that ever since, and he was right. Waterproof trousers will spend most of their life living in the bottom of your rucksack, or the top of your rucksack, as they probably should be, but that's where they're going to be. But one day you're going to need them, so just get something that's light and packable, unless you intend to spend your time out in the good old British weather a lot. But the layering system doesn't end there. We shouldn't necessarily think of the layering system as just 3 layers. It could be multiple layers. So if we're going for a wild camp tonight, what am I going to do to keep myself warm? The tents look nice and cosy and toasty on the brochures, but let's face it, it's not the warmest existence in the middle of winter. So you'll probably want an additional thick thermal insulating layer. On this occasion it's down, and there's another whole discussion to be had about down and synthetic insulation layers, but that's one for another video. So there we go. Now I want to keep myself warm, so I've got my mid layer insulation layer, and now I go for my thick thermal insulation layer over the top. On this occasion it's responsibly sourced down and it's hydrophobic, but I'm still exposed to precipitation if I'm outside. So in terms of outer shells, something else you need to give some thought to is the sizing of it. It needs to be sufficient to cover those insulating layers that you're wearing without compressing them. If you start compressing those insulating layers, then you're starting to lose some of that insulation created by the air trapped in there. And by insulating your body with multiple layers like this and trapping that air in there, it is probably more effective than one large jacket. The down jacket does a great job if you're on an Antarctic expedition. It also looks fairly cool if you want to look like Nanook the North when you enter the pub. But actually having a modular system with multiple layers is probably far more effective. I mentioned earlier that we're going to radiate heat mainly from our torso. So on top of this now, I'm going to apply another layer. So now I've got my base layer, that's my wicking layer, I've got my thermal insulation layer, which is my mid layer, I've got my outer shell, I've got a thermal layer in addition to that, and I've got an additional thermal layer by way of a gilet. That's keeping my trunk nice and toasty. And that now makes my system pretty modular, doesn't it? The gloves can come off if I need to cool down. The hat can come off if necessary. I've got one layer that can come away if I need to vent a little bit more. I've got neck zips all the way through here. And of course this modular principle to clothing doesn't just apply to wild campers and walkers. You might be a photographer or an artist, or just somebody that wants to sit by a river with a flask of tea. But you may have a walk in there, and this is a really good way of regulating temperature and protecting yourself from the elements while still enjoying the outdoors. This doesn't have to be a costly affair. There are plenty of budget brands available out there. I remember when fleece first became available on the market, generally to walkers, and they were like hen's teeth. Well, they weren't really. If you had money, you could afford it, but we didn't have that sort of disposable income. And I can remember the first fleece that I ever had. I had to buy it second hand. And now we can go to a retail outlet and you can pick up like 2 fleeces, 2 mid-layer fleeces for, what, 10 quid? In some cases, you can. Waterproof and windproof shells don't have to cost the earth. Their functionality and their breathability will cost a little bit more if you want them to be effective. And synthetic base layers are cheap as chips. They don't have to be fashionable. So I hope you don't mind my little exploration of the layering system. And please folks, if you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Comments, I don't mind comments. I like getting back to comments and chatting with people. I'm no expert in this stuff. I'm just talking about the things that I do in the places that I go with the stuff that I've got. And I'll gladly share that with anybody. I'd really appreciate subscribers to the channel, so if you like what we're doing, there's a button down there somewhere. I'd appreciate that. I'd be really flattered if you followed our channel. And meanwhile, I'm going to take a walk down that way into Wistman's Wood. Wistman's Wood is an ancient, high-altitude oak woodland. There's only 3 of them on Dartmoor, and it's a pretty special place. Onwards and upwards.